Hello everyone, welcome back to The Question, where you have the questions and I have the answers. And this week we are once again not talking about the Jewish organizational drama, not trauma, well, a little bit of trauma, because instead we're talking about what makes good Jewish representation. And the reason I decided to once again pivot away from this very interesting drama is that somebody in my last video commented that part of the Jewish identity is arguing and wrestling with hard facts and being in this constant debate discussion with each other and not having one clear answer, but learning through this like continued discussion and argument, which is very true. And so that, coupled with the fact that Hey Alma posted a very interesting and I'd say slightly controversial post about Elphaba in the Wicked movie, in addition to the fact that I just watched Agatha All Along. I'm going to talk about the messy discussions that I have witnessed around Jewish representation in the media and the somewhat problematic inconsistencies I have found within these discussions, especially on like popular blogs like Hey Alma and Ish.com. So to start, there will be spoilers for pretty much everything. Namely, there will be spoilers somewhat for Wicked, and there will be spoilers for Agatha All Along. So if you have not yet seen those things and you don't want spoilers, don't watch this video until after. If you don't care, you're in the right place. So Agatha All Along, first of all, great show. And one of the things that it was, honestly, I didn't see much about this. Most of the commentary has been about it being very gay, which it is very gay, but also notably, it's very Jewish, except it's not very Jewish. As in, there is one episode where we show an in-depth, real bar mitzvah. And it's beautiful. I mean, we have him holding this like beautiful gilded Torah. He pronounces the Hebrew amazingly for someone who's playing a 13-year-old. And all of it is exquisite. We show all the dances, the horror. We show just like the community coming together. It really is the most in-depth Jewish thing I have seen Marvel produce since they failed with Moon Knight, which we will talk about later when it comes to Jewish representation. And it even got the blessings of Hey Alma, saying that it was the perfect Jewish representation in a show. The episode was perfect. It was fabulous. However, it wasn't. And that's something that I think is interesting, is that this is being lauded by Hey Alma as the perfect representation of Judaism in a show. However, Joe Locke, who plays the character of Billy Maximoff / Billy Kaplan / Teen / Wiccan / whatever, is not Jewish. And previously, there have been discussions by Hey Alma and by other Jews on whether it is okay for non-Jews to play Jews, no matter how good the representation actually is. It's whether this is called jewface or not, or whether jewface is only relegated to people actually wearing prosthetics or altering their features to look more Jewish, or similarly like Oscar Isaac in Moon Knight only getting cast as Jewish characters because they look ethnically ambiguous, which I will come back to later because I think there's something really interesting about how Jews are portrayed in media in this way, and this is also part of the discussion. Anyway, Joe Locke is not Jewish, and neither is his character. William Kaplan is Jewish, however, Billy Maximoff is not, and that's been a well-criticized aspect of Wanda in the MCU, is that this character who is normally Romani, this character who is normally Jewish, is neither. And her children are neither. And so even though William Kaplan had this beautiful bat mitzvah, he died. And now this new soul that's inhabiting his body is nominatively not Jewish. And my brother got upset because he was like, it's really interesting that his son's allowed to be Jewish, but Wanda's not allowed to be. And it's like, well, even the son's not allowed to be Jewish. They just put that in there, I think, to distract from the fact that neither really are. Granted, it once again was done beautifully, and I think that is a really good representation of Judaism and the community and the rituals. However, it's, I think, hypocritical that this gets a pass, and shows like The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel has been criticized so heavily because none of the actors are Jewish. And because that has been torn to shreds by not just Hey Alma, but many social media sites, by many Jewish influencers, for not casting actual Jews to play this Jewish family and portray the Jewish experience. However, it's completely okay when Joe Locke does it, and technically there is a difference because the whole purpose of Agatha all along is not to show Jewish representation. That's just an aspect of his character and not even an important or relevant one after that flashback, versus Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, that is an entire show, and does, as I put in, show that ethnic ambiguity to denote that one is Jewish. Tony Shalhoub, who is I believe he's a Lebanese actor who has been cast in all racial profiles because he is racially ambiguous, is put in this Jewish role because he is racially ambiguous. And it's the same thing with Oscar Isaac, who is a Guatemalan actor who is racially ambiguous. And so it puts you in this position where you're like, oh, they're clearly not white, there's something different, and that's how you denote that he is Jewish. Which I do want to come back to, because the racial aspect of Jewish representation I think is really important, as most of the Jewish representation that we see is white and Ashkenazi. And so while we are nitpicking and going up in arms about all this representation, there are considerable parts of the Jewish community that are not represented at all in mainstream media. But that is a discussion that widely gets ignored because we're focusing on how our own experiences are being portrayed and nitpicking at that instead of representing on whose experience, instead of thinking about whose experiences are not getting represented. And yeah. Another part of this is back to the discussion of what is jewface. Because as I said, the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel cast has been accused of doing jewface because none of them are actually Jewish, but they are cast in these Jewish characters, which honestly, me personally, I think the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is a great representation of American Judaism, especially for that time period, because they act almost exactly like my family in New York does. Like this extravagant, very Jewish, very eccentric, overdramatic lifestyle is something that I grew up with when visiting my grandmother in New York, like down to how crazy large the apartment was, and like all the different going like to market rituals, all of that is so very similar. And but obviously that's not everybody's experience, and this is something else that was brought up about social class and how that's being portrayed. But back to the Jewface thing, is that Jewface, or is it actually the use of prosthetics? Which then a very interesting thing came up of Catherine Hahn was cast as a Jewish character, or I think she was supposed to be a Jewish person in a biopic, and people like sent her threatening messages, and everybody hated it because they were going to put a wig on her, they were going to put prosthetic nose on her to make her appear more like the actress that she was portraying, or the singer that she was portraying. And everyone's like, no, this is really harmful. Like the fact that you're making her hair curlier, you're making her nose bigger is Jewface. It's a harmful stereotype. And that's wrong because she's not even a Jewish actress herself. And similar criticisms were brought up with Bradley Cooper during the announcement that he was going to be in Maestro. However, once Maestro landed, like once it was released, everybody was perfectly fine. And they were like, it's not bad that he put a prosthetic nose on him. It's just making him look more like the character, you know? Even though like he's not Jewish, he doesn't look like that. But that was fine, and that was deemed, once it was released, that was deemed okay, and that it wasn't Jewface, it wasn't harmful. But then Catherine Hahn gets threatening messages because her portrayal, in a similar sense, would have been harmful. And which, once again, I think is really hypocritical, that it depends on whether we like the media, whether we like the person or not. It's so fluid, and obviously these aren't all like definitive opinions because, you know, we are all wrestling with this, and these are all dialogues to be had, But it's interesting, like, what narratives get portrayed as being anti-Semitic and what narratives don't. Similarly, we've had other movie musicals that have come out, like Dear Evan Hansen and Mean Girls, who had Jewish characters who were then no longer Jewish. Dear Evan Hansen's switch from Jared being Jewish to Jared not being Jewish got, like, no recognition whatsoever. I think there was some, like, oh, he's not Jewish, that's so sad, kind of stuff, but it was, like, ultimately it was fine. And then Gretchen Wieners is no longer Jewish in the new movie, except she is, which was interesting because Hey Alma posted a thing being like, Gretchen Wieners isn't Jewish anymore, but that's okay. She doesn't need to be. And then everybody in the comments was like, actually, she is still Jewish. Why do you think just because she's Cuban, she can't also be Jewish? And then people are also lamenting of like, well, they could have done more to make her more Jewish. Like, instead of speaking Spanish, she could have spoken Ladino. And it's like, I think we're getting way too serious about the Jewish representation in Mean Girls. And maybe that's what Hey Alma's post was meant to be about, was that of all the Jewish media we could have had, Mean Girls is not the priority. But it did spark an interesting discussion about the potentiality and Jewishness of Gretchen Wieners. And then back to what I said about the social class and how that's portrayed, and just the nuances of American Jewish Ashkenazi identity is You Are So Not Invited to My Bar Mitzvah also caused a lot of criticism, despite it being a Jewish movie based off of a Jewish book, played entirely by Jewish actors. I mean, it's Adam Sandler and Idina Menzel and Adam Sandler's entire family, for Christ's sake. I mean, and there was a lot of criticism because they're like, this isn't realistic. This portrays Jews as very rich and very deserving, and that is just another propagated harmful stereotype. With people being like, well, if they are so rich, what is the issue with, like, the cost of the dress? Or, like, because of all this, it didn't seem realistic and people couldn't relate to it. Which I thought was really interesting because I wasn't excited to see the movie because I don't like Adam Sandler personally, but, you know, like, this seemed like a really good rallying point of like, wow, we're getting our own coming of age, like, teen movie, and Adam Sandler is finally doing something Jewish with his career. That's awesome. And then it was met with, like, such, like, harsh criticism about how realistic and how we're portraying Jews to a wider audience. And then similarly with, I think it's like Nobody Wants This. Once again, torn apart to a violent degree, I will say, which if you watch Nobody Wants This, it is about I'd say probably Reform rabbi who falls in love with a Gentile woman, and neither side of the family wants this match because her family doesn't want her marrying a Jew, his Jewish family does not want him marrying a Gentile, and I think by the end, she eventually decides to convert to Judaism to be with him. And the reaction that I saw to this was astounding. Because first people were pissed that the mother was portrayed as annoying, which is a bad Jewish stereotype. People were pissed that the rabbi fell in love with a mid-Gentile woman, which they didn't use the word Gentile. They were actually bringing back slurs for Gentile women. And also feeling it okay to call not just the character slurs, but to call the actress a slur. And DMing that to her and harassing her for her participation in the show. And then people who didn't like that she converted in the end, because people who were intermarried were like, well, that just takes away my entire experience because she ended up converting. And similarly, people were like, oh, but I love the fact that she converted because we need more blonde Jewish representation because most Jews are portrayed, once again, as ethnically ambiguous and not white. And it's a really interesting interesting reaction to, once again, this was supposed to be very blatantly Jewish show has been decidedly made like un-Jewish or problematically Jewish by the Jewish community. And so how does Wicked fit into this? So Hey Alma made a post about Wicked, basically saying, like, but wasn't Elphaba from Wicked Jewish? And basically made the argument that because Idina Menzel portrayed Elphaba in the Wicked play, because the creation of the character for the musical was informed by the Jewish creator's own experience with fascism, with the Nazis, with his family's past, with the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, that Wicked is a nominatively Jewish story, and to make the character black by having a black actress portray her loses that Jewish quality to the character and to the story. And the comments of that post were kind of just like, why can't she be both black and Jewish? Why can't, you know, like, both things be true at once? And like, it's an allegory about just being othered, and anybody can like relate to this story. So why does it have to be both? Like, why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't it represent both, or like some other third thing? But I also have seen, since the Hey Alma post, a lot more posts mourning the lack of Judaism in the Wicked movie. Or once again attaching not just Elphaba, but like saying, well, if Elphaba isn't Jewish, then the animals and Dr. Dillamond are. Which I think the story of Wicked does relate very well to experiences of anti-Semitism as well as anti-blackness. I think, as stated, it is a good representation of what it is like to be othered and the systemic othering that happens within, especially a university system. But to create this trivial thing of either or, like, oh, because she's black, she's not Jewish, once again brings up that racial aspect that I think Ashkenazi Jews are dealing a lot with right now, is the fact that most of us are white. And even though we're not getting Jewish representation racially, we are represented in most media. And using race and that ethnic ambiguity or racial ambiguity to portray us creates an interesting idea of what Judaism is and how it's represented. Especially how to view us, ourselves. And then, of course, there was the issue with the conflation between Israeli and Jewish identity with Brave New World, which, and I'd say also with Mary, the new movie that's coming out, the very controversial movie that's coming out. Both are very controversial movies because of the casting of Israeli actresses in main roles. But the problem with Brave New World was that they cast an Israeli actress, but they changed the character. They announced that they changed the character, so she was no longer going to be Sabra, which is like Israel's Captain America. She was just going to be a Black Widow. But she's still the same character, just not the same superhero. And there were so many calls that they'd erased her Jewish identity. She wasn't going to be Jewish anymore because she wasn't going to be Sabra. And I think that's interesting because many people also pointed out is that she can be a Black Widow and also be Jewish. She can be Russian and she can be Jewish. She can be not Sabra and be Jewish. But they erased her Israeli identity, or her nominatively Israeli identity, by not making her Sabra. Which I thought was really, really interesting. That was the discussion, is like, you're making her not Jewish, where she could still very much be Jewish. And then similarly, what is it? With Mary, which I think is also really interesting, is the debate of whether they should have casted a Israeli or a Palestinian actress, when I think also if we're looking at an Israeli or a Palestinian actress, we should be looking at like more than just that, because like Mary is Jewish, you know, and so the fact that the director and the casting guy was like, well, it's important that we cast Israelis, once again making it synonymous with Jews, because you could cast an Israeli Arab, an Israeli Muslim, an Israeli Christian, but you just said Israeli. And so and once again, within Israel, there's a variation of Jews. There's Ashkenazi Jews, there's Mizrahi Jews, there's Sephardic Jews. I think for total accuracy, casting a Mizrahi Jew, one that's from the Middle East, who has backgrounds with the Middle East, would be the most accurate. But that's, once again, not what's being thought of. It's just being, oh, Israel, they're all Jewish. I could cast anybody from Israel because not only they're Jewish, but they're living in the Holy Land. And that makes it the most accurate. First of all, I think that just making a movie like that in the times that we're in is all bad. And there was no good that could have come from it. Because no matter who you cast, at this point, it is just going to be political. But that was a decision, and I think it's a really interesting decision to make. Especially since the director himself is not Jewish, is not Israeli, is not Palestinian. And so it's like, why? What purpose do you have in making this? Why did you choose to do it? Because now it's just brought so much more harm on everybody else other than you. But yeah, those are just my thoughts on this weird, messy discussion about what is good Jewish representation. And I think that all Jewish representation, as well as this discussion, leaves a lot to be desired in the way of representing the full Jewish community, not just American Ashkenazis. Well, with that being said, have a good rest of your day. I hope you have a good holiday season, or if you're finishing up finals, I wish you the best of luck. Be excellent to each other, and party on, dudes.